So it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend Andrew Foss, who's going to be talking today about the 12th house. And Andrew, over to you. And sorry, let me just introduce him. Andrew is the author of the Planets of the Yoga and the Sri Jyoti Star software. And Planets of the Yogas is a real classic book. You should get it from Amazon or any of the other bookstores that are selling. And also Sri Jyoti Star, Andrew will tell you about it. We had the demonstration too. Is the most excellent software. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So this is the second lecture on the 12th house. The last one was really just to do with the day-to-day indications. The 12th house is our gati. Gati means our movement. And this is because the 12th house is the feet. So where are we walking? So one part of where are we walking is the life that we live here on this planet. So the sort of bigger picture of our life on this planet is shown by the 12th house. Not so much the details, more where we have to walk in terms of the things we enjoy, the things we experience, the type of life we live, the sort of career we have. All these things are shown from the 12th house. So now the question is that all that there is in life? You know, we may not feel enormous amounts of joy from all of that. Some of it we will. If you take the path that you're meant to take, at some point you start to feel at least a great relief, because you think, somehow I must have done what I was meant to do. You know, it produces a kind of relief. And maybe there's quite a bit of joy associated with that. But there's a much bigger picture. So that's what we want to look at today, and the indications that we can derive from the 12th house of how to move forward in this path. So we'll start with honoring the Guru. Om Gurave Namah. Om Gurave Namah. Om Gurave Namah. Om Gam Ganapataye Namah. Om Aim Saraswatyaye Namah. So as Camilla so kindly mentioned, I produced this book, Yoga of the Planets, which is to do with all the mantras of the Navagraha, of the 9 planets. So about 1,000 mantras with translation and commentary. And I've written the Sri Jyoti Star software. That's an ongoing work. So there's some exciting new developments coming soon. So the 12th house is the final stage of the Jala Trikona. Jala means water. We've had quite a few, we've learned a lot about the Jala from the previous speakers, but this is another view of it. Each of the elements has 3 signs. It's a triangle. That's Trikona means triangle. So the triangle of each element shows the whole expression of that in our life. And each element has a very important role to play. But one could argue that the Jala Trikona is the more important one, because it's all to do with what we're feeling, what we're tasting, what we're enjoying. So for most of us, or maybe all of us, that is what really matters. You know, after all, human life is all about basically trying to adjust your life so you feel best. You know, isn't it always the case? I mean, we live our life more on our feelings and our rationalization. We fall back on the rationalization if we don't really feel what to do, yeah? I mean, it's not, everybody's like that to a greater extent. We can pretend to be rational, but in reality, fundamentally, it's all about how we feel. So the root of the first step, you could say the root of the Geology Corner is the fourth house. And the fourth house is known as Bandha. Now, Bandha is probably the root of the English words bond and bondage. Now, the word bond sounds awfully nice. We like our bonds. But if it becomes bondage, we think, oh, that doesn't sound good. Somebody's tying us up against our will, isn't it? But no, bondage is something we can voluntarily enter into, like some marriage contract. So bandha in Sanskrit is just to do with all those things or all those people with whom we have a bond. However that bond is. I mean, the first and most important is the mother, but then there is the father, the other relatives. There's the spouse, there's the close servants, those who, if we're in the elite, we have maybe some servants who work in our house. We feel they often some kind of bond with them. Then there's the pets. Animals we might own are in the sixth, but those that are, we have a bond with, particular bond, that's now moving into the fourth house. So all these things. And then in all the desirable things, we can be attached to objects. So we can say the fourth house is like life's pleasure garden. It's where we're enjoying all the things that we like. And in the Vedic, or in the Sri Vidya view, or the Sri Chakra view, you could say this is the Trilokya Mohini. Trilokya Mohini means that which is kind of dazzling or bedazzling the three worlds. Everyone, wherever your home is, whether your home is on Earth or in some other loka, it's still your home, and there's something about it that's, you're attached to. That's the Mohini aspect, attachment. So the natural ruler, as well as the Karaka, or significator for the fourth house, is the moon. Now, if you look at the zodiac has three, it's divided into three sections. And we say Bhur, Bhuva, Swa. These are the three, what we call Vyahritis. They represent as far as our life is concerned, the first four signs are Bhur, which means the kind of early life. See, in that Aries to Cancer phase, basically we're getting conceived, we're being born, carried and born, and growing up. So all of that's going on in the first four signs. We don't have to carry any responsibility. Somebody else is taking care of everything. Hopefully. So then is Bhuva. So what happens at the end of Cancer is there's a Gandanta. Gandanta means a kind of gap where there's a major shift because we're moving from one phase of life to another. So whenever you do that, there's a challenging situation. So basically, when your parents say, okay, you've grown up now, go and get a job and go out there, get educated, whatever it is, higher education, there's this sort of major transit. I mean, primary, it's not the higher education, it's when you're actually becoming an independent person. So this is happening in that transition from Cancer to Leo. It's the beginning of the Bhuva. Bhuva means, people talk about this earth, the intermediate space and the heavens. But the intermediate space means the rest of the world, Earth means, Bhur means basically my little world, my family, But Bhur is like, okay, now I've got to deal with all these other people who I didn't grow up with, who I don't know. I've got to go out and find a spouse I never met her perhaps, or whatever. There's a whole shift, which now forces us to take up a lot of responsibility. And this is the shift into the Bhuva. So the period of life, which is being responsible and having your own home as opposed to living in somebody else's home, basically, is shown by Leo, Virgo, and Libra, mainly. The Bhuva includes Scorpio, but the reality is that by the end of Libra, you've done the job. You've had the children, you've brought them up, they've gone off for their own independence. And now it's like, what next? You see, Scorpio. So there's a sort of a transition that's coming. And the big transition is actually at the end of Scorpio. But during Scorpio, you are basically having to prepare for it. Whether we try and pretend it's not going to happen, but inside we know it's going to happen. So there has to be a preparation. And if you're wise, you prepare. If you put it off until this stage, fine. You've still got probably some time for preparation. So the whole thing about Scorpio is that basically it's preparing to move on from this planet. And that's why Scorpio people are like they are, they know that their spirituality has to be developed. And if they don't want to do that, then they get a bit, prickly perhaps, because it's a tough spot, basically. So the 8th bhava, which is the second part of the Geology Corner, is like Scorpio, and its name is Randra. So Randra means, like, it's the English word rending. So there's a kind of rending and a tearing. Why? Because basically we're going to have to let go of this body, and we're going to have to face death. What is that all about? Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm frightened. There's a lot of intensity around it. So this is a very challenging phase. The rulers are Mars and Ketu. They're also challenging. So what happens at the end of Scorpio is basically you leave. So we'll go into what happens in a second about that. But basically, Scorpio is this transition phase, which is very challenging. And that is this, a very major aspect of life, which we'll discuss a bit further in the next slide. So then you died, right? So you kind of fell into the Scorpio Gandanta, and it's just the Gandanta. You go in one side, you come out the other side, and now you're Mula Trikona, Mula Nakshatra. Now, Mula is in Sagittarius, is not the Pisces, but we're now entering the domain of the 12th house. The 12th house, we could say, is the Moksha Bhava. And the Moksha Bhava means freedom. So basically, there's a choice. You either get freedom or you get recycled. Now, recycling is good. If you're not ready to be free, then you get recycled. It's all very fair. And the planets involved are Jupiter and Ketu. So now, Jupiter's Mula Trikona happens to coincide with the first 3 Navamshas of Mula Nakshatra. Now, I don't know how many of you have studied the Mula Trikonas of the planets. Parashara gives us the degrees. He says between this degree and this degree is the Mula Trikona of this planet. So we all read that. We've all studied it, right? Some of us may have memorized it, but we don't hear much discussion about it in conferences. In fact, I've never heard a discussion. I'm sure it happens. I just wasn't in the lecture, right? But I don't think it's a very well understood aspect of Jyotish, and yet it's unbelievably important, because if you study carefully the Mula Trikona, now one of the great contributions of Pandit Sandirat is he explained to us that the Mula Trikona is the office. It's the office of the planet. The planet has his home, that's his own side, but he has an area of responsibility, his job. Now, the thing about our job, suppose we get a job, and when we get the job, we get a job description. Okay, these are the things that you have to do. But, you have to do certain things in the office. And then there might be other things that need to be done in the office, but they're not part of your job, so they're optional. Even if nobody's doing it, you're not being paid to do it, so why would you do it? Well, you might, if you had some spare time and you felt like doing it, you might do it, you see. So this is the reality with the planets. The planets only feel responsible for that part of the zodiac, which is their Mula Trikona. The rest is optional. If they're in a good mood, if they got nothing else to do, they'll help out in that area. So if you study each of the Mula Trikonas carefully, it's a wonderful and enlightening realization about each of the planets. So then what about Jupiter? Jupiter has these first three Navamshas. Why only three, you see? Well, I'm going to give you a suggestion based on my research. So basically what's happening is all these souls are arriving in Mula. There are four Navamshas. The fourth Navamsha is a Cancer Navamsha, so it has a tremendous amount of sattva. So the people who have developed a lot of sattva in this life, they're basically falling straight into the Cancer Navamsha. The guru, which means the rishis, the sages, all those great ones who are the fully conscious souls, especially the higher up ones, they don't have to worry about you. You already sorted your life. You're going to go, you went straight into that Cancer Navamsha. And the Cancer Navamsha is basically a holding zone before you enter the great Purvashada. Now, Purvashada is like the cosmic washing machine. So after that, you start to meet the gods. So in order to meet the gods, you have to clean up a bit. I mean, even if you're a very, pure soul by human considerations or earthly considerations, you can be sure when you get up there, you have need for cleaning. So that is all taken care of. So those who have that kind of purity to go on and meet the gods and even go higher, they get to go from the Cancer Navamsha. So maybe we're not quite that pure, but maybe we're good. We did good. We behaved ourselves in some way. We looked after whatever we had to do. We were kind to people and all that. So we have a lot of credit on our scale, on our list or record, whatever it is. So then we arrive in these first three Navamshas. Maybe we could divide the three Navamshas based on the various levels of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. But anyway, so this is where the guru comes in, because somebody has to decide what's happening next. You see, the great thing about the great gurus is that they can decide where you go next. They have an eye on all the souls, and they can choose what happens next. And most people are going to be recycled. They're not going to go to the world of the gods. So basically, they get bumped back to Aries. And the whole cycle starts again. I mean, there may be a gap as far as earthly time is concerned, but the time functions differently up there. But then maybe the guru decides, this person has actually done pretty good. So we'll just push them over to Cancer Navamsha and they can, get ready and they can go through the cleaning machine. So it's the nice thing. This is actually a very beautiful concept, because basically when you die, there's nothing to fear, because some wise person is going to have a look at your case, and whatever credit you got will be taken into account. There's a lot of stories about people dying and then being met by sometimes a relative or some guide. So you don't necessarily meet one of the great rishis, because they have lots of people helping them. They say, go and meet this person. Your grandson's just arrived, go and meet him. But the whole thing is being managed from another level, you see. We know this from Parasha, because he said this is the Mula Trikona of Guru. So anyway, so basically what we could say is we divide the thing into three. We have the place of earthly delights as the fourth house. Then we have, I've written the Styx, right? So, in the Greek philosophy, there's a river between the world, earthly life of man, and the other world. So there's this river called the Styx. I'm sure you all know this. And you have to catch a boat and cross it, right? So basically that's the eighth house, crossing the river. You see, eighth house is transformation. Right? And then there's the 12th house, which is to do with basically the processing, the lower and higher worlds, and the Paramapada, which is the supreme world of Vishnu. Those high worlds, Kailash and all that. Goloka, if we're so lucky. Good. So let's look at the place of earthly delights. So what are we doing? We're trying our best to stay here, and we don't want to visit the sticks. Like, how many people are volunteering to go to the sticks? Very, very few, right? And if we feel that we're getting a bit close to it, then we often go and see an astrologer. I mean, that's what, as an astrologer, that's what you're receiving. The people are feeling some kind of rending. Their life is getting torn up a bit. And so they are coming to see you. Why? Because you say you studied the 8th house. You're the expert on the 8th house. You have to go and see the expert, right? So then people ask for remedies. So one remedy is to prolong the stay in the garden. You know, keep us, stay alive and all that. Or we want to make it more attractive. I don't like this. I want a better, you know, I need a bigger house. I need a nicer spouse. Whatever it is. It's trying to make the world more attractive. And this is Rajas. You know, we're going to talk about Rajas, Sattva and Tamas more. But Rajas means just more activity. You want more busyness, basically. You want nicer business, right? And then some people, thank God they don't come to me very often, but they've got some kind of revenge in mind, or they have some kind of plan which is basically going to cause somebody else grief. So it happens, you know, this is something astrologers face. Someone comes and says, can you throw some bad eye on this other guy? You know, maybe he's my political opponent, push him down, you see. So astrologers may have learned how to do that, but do you really want to do that? This is the question. This is tamas, pure tamas. So we have a choice, you see, when people come to us. If they want rajas, we give them rajas. Surely our own rajas is going to increase. If they want tamas and we give them tamas, our own tamas is going to go shooting up. There's no way of avoiding this. It's absolutely bound to happen. So if you do that, you're going to have to do serious sadhana practice to clean up the mess, you know. If you don't, if you say, I'm too busy, I have so many clients a day, I'll never have a time to do the sadhana, within a short period of time, you've ruined yourself. You will end up in the sticks. You know? So anyway, but people need some kind of advice. So I'm not in for the tamas, but rajas, basically we can't ignore it. People need it, people want it. Sure. So you can give them some rajas advice. Why not? That's one of the parts of what we're doing. There's no harm in it, but it's good to give a little sattva, like small push in the upward direction, because that is actually more helpful to the person than all the rajas. They may have asked for rajas, but their heart is not asking for rajas. Their mind may be asking for rajas, but the soul and the heart, as it's connected to the soul, really wants to go up because they'd like to enjoy some more happiness. You know, happiness isn't going to come from rajas. You know, there's a logic that if I have more rajas, I'll feel happier, but that's just the delusion which the wonderful planets Mercury and Venus throw on us. But it doesn't work. It never worked before. It won't work in the future. So a little bit of sattva will give people a taste of joy, and it'll move them up a little bit. And because we gave it, then the gurus will be happy with us. We did our job. So that's my suggestion. Don't sell hope. Okay. Astrologers find out fairly quickly that selling hope is very profitable in the short term. You know, because if people pay they'll pay premium price for hope, basically. But if what you're telling them is a lie and you know it's a lie, you will get a visit from Shani. You know, you may say the best of your knowledge that this upcoming dasha looks good. You see, that's fair enough, because if it's true that is what you understand, that's fine. But if you simply look to see some different dasha and say, oh, everything will be fine then, and you take the money, and later on they're going to be calling you saying, why is it nothing happened? But by that time you've done a runner, right? You collected your money and move to some other state or country. Don't get into, please don't get into that, because Shani is not, he'll follow you wherever you go, that's for sure. So it all depends on the guna in the mind of the astrologer. Like, what is our guna? Guna means sattva, rajas, and tamas. So if we notice that our tamas is rising, we start giving people some kind of negative, any kind of negative, harsh advice, harsh predictions, then you can be sure that your own consciousness is coming under the influence of tamas. And that's very dangerous, because they say that, bad advice, the giver of bad advice gets 3 times the negative karma of the person who receives the bad advice and follows it. So you go down fast. I'm just saying, it's better to stop doing readings. You can go on studying and all that. Just take a break until maybe that dasha period ends, or you do some good sadhana and you can feel the sattva rising again. It's much safer. Good. So this is a sort of very, very simplified schematic of the situation. So what we see is very thin plane. It's the earth plane. We talk about the earth plane, Bhuloka. So it's very thin because it represents really, how much time do we have on this planet? Very little. And how big is this planet? It's actually very small. So we have a very limited scope where we can go, how long we have. If we were living for thousands of years on the earth, we'd visit everywhere and then we say, what do we do next, you see? But because the lifespan is so short, you can't even visit everywhere on earth on this small planet. So the whole thing is to understand this Bhuloka, for all its positive greatness, it's still a very thin, it's a small space we're living in. And then we all die, of course. So then we go on this sort of recycling tube. So anyway, let's talk about this a little bit. We come in to the Bhuloka through the 7th house. This was very beautifully explained earlier today. The 7th house is the place of conception. We're born in the 4th house. So if you look at it, the count from the 7th house to the 4th house is basically the 9 months of conception, of gestation. So the first 3 months gets you basically to the 10th house, the natural Capricorn or Makara. So this is where the full entrapment of the soul takes place. You see, in the 7th house, it's basically the soul is assigned to the fetus. So, okay, you're going to be this one. So you start hanging around, you're waiting. Because the little few cells that exist there cannot, the soul can't integrate with it. So there's some waiting phase, and then after 3 months, then there's enough development that the soul can integrate and basically gets trapped. It's, the prison door shuts. Here you are, you see. So that's why the first 3 months is very critical. And that is why, this is an important concept. And a lot of the laws in the world agree with this concept. So then you have another 6 months, you get to the 4th house and you're born. So then you run around and you do whatever you do. And eventually you arrive in the 12th house and you're leaving. So through the 8th house process, but you leave through the 12th house. And then you either you may go to other worlds. You can go to other worlds. You can go to higher worlds and lower worlds. You might even visit some other planets because you've been reborn on other planets. Apparently there are other solar systems where you can be reborn. But, once you've been a human being, then there's some kind of natural, is it easy for the soul to attune to the human body? So there is that tendency to come back here, until you're really a highly developed soul. So anyway, all of that is going on in the blue tube. But you see there's very small yellow straight up path which goes to freedom, the Paramapada. That's the way up where you don't have to come back down again. And how do you get onto that? Basically, you have to reach a point where you have nothing that you want. Because if you have nothing that you want, why would you come back? If you don't want anything more, if you have nothing you want on this planet, why would you come back to it? You won't. You see, I had a client, she asked me, said, is this my last life? I said, well, is there anything left on your bucket list? Or something to that effect. And then there wasn't any more question. I didn't hear any more on that question. It just finished. Because she knew very well there were some unfulfilled desires. And so they say that when you're dying, your attention goes, you can't control this, it just happens, to whatever is kind of the deepest thing that is hanging around in your consciousness. And that is pretty much your fundamental desire, which plays a big role in your next life. This is what they say. But basically, in order to fully escape, you have to basically finish. You have to feel, I've done it. You know, I don't need this, I don't need that, it's all fine. Genuinely, if you feel that genuinely, you are very close to the exit point. So, getting a human birth. Let's assume that most of us haven't reached that kind of stage. So we are going to die and we are going to come back. So the question then arises, what are my chances for getting back as a human? Because there's lots of other possibilities, you see. The number of souls, let's assume it's infinite. The number of wombs is certainly finite on this planet. There's a lot of them, but it's still finite. And amongst those, the number of human wombs is quite small, relatively. So according to the great ones, for example, Adi Shankaracharya said getting a human birth is actually very difficult to attain. And the Buddha went a bit further and said it's essentially impossible. Very close to be almost impossible, let's say. That's the way you put it. So it's not an easy job, basically. It may take quite a while, depending. We're going to see some hopeful things. So don't feel any hopelessness. But I wanted to mention this quote of Albert Einstein, that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Now, this could be applied throughout life. You know, in every phase of life, we have to remember this quote if we're wise. But it certainly applies as far as, you know, spiritual evolution is concerned. Because, you know, if we're just going to go around and come back and do all the same thing over again, how have we evolved? You know, in what way have we developed? You see? So we should think, you know, to what extent is the life we're living just a matter of doing the same thing over and over again? You see? So also maybe somebody said a wise person should consider the future. You see, it's very easy to just forget about it. See, when you're young, you think you're immortal. You notice that around you people are dying, but you think that's just their problem. But later on you realize, no, I'm not immortal. Things start hurting. You know, this body's not going to last that long. So it's good if when you're young you realize, but even when you're older, it's okay. As long as you're still alive, you've got time to prepare, you see. So, okay, looking at the world population. So at the time of the Buddha and Shankara, it's approximately similar, about 100 million. So it seems like a lot, but it's really not very many. Now we have 8,000 million. So you say, oh, hey, maybe it's easy to get a human birth. Okay, probably it's easier. Maybe like it was suggested the other day that even people moving up from the animal kingdom are finding it chances of getting a human birth. But then we think, what about the future? Because I mean, all of us will probably be dead in the next 100 years, I should think. So then we'll be looking for another slot. So what we're seeing at the moment, okay, there's dropping fertility, there's lots of other factors like climate change, and there is a very great likelihood that the population of the planet will go down, perhaps substantially, because we're ruining the environment. We're destroying it systematically, as if we don't care, you see. Now, you see the famous case of the Arab sheikh. He had oil wells, and someone said to him, look, these oil wells, you're basically destroying the planet. And he said, well, I'm profiting now, and by the time it starts to become a problem, I'll be dead. Why do I care, you see? And we should think, is this what we're thinking? You know, if you're a bit older like me, you think, I'm probably not going to see all these catastrophes. So is this my problem? Yes, of course it's my problem, because I might want to come back. And this is the point I wanted to make, because maybe we don't think about this too much, but it's a very serious question, you know, about how do we get another slot? We'd like to make more progress spiritually, and it's easier to make progress spiritually in a human body than, you know, maybe as a dog or whatever, mosquito, or even just hanging around in the ethers. So let's think about the three gunas. This is the critical thing, the three gunas. The three gunas means the three kind of qualities. So tamas is the darkness quality. It brings inertness, carelessness, and cruelty. Cruelty is really classic tamas. Carelessness is tamas. Now, plants are not careless or cruel, but they do have more tamas quality. So it's the human beings that bring out the worst of the tamas. Then rajas is typical human life. Lots of activity and movement. That's all fine. The nature of the present world particularly is to encourage rajas. Everything we're exposed to in the media and everything is all rajas, rajas, rajas. You know, buy, you know. Then sattva alone brings satisfaction. All the satisfaction is with sattva. There's no satisfaction available from rajas, and absolutely none with tamas, only pain. And what is a sign of sattva? How do we know our sattva level? It's a question of how satisfied we are. Are we satisfied with what we've got? If we're satisfied with what we've got, we have a lot of sattva. It's very simple to figure out, you see. If there's something that, you know, this thing is not good enough, that thing is not good enough, then, you know, it's rajas predominating, more rajas. So what we're seeing in the present world is how an excess of rajas and tamas is basically degrading the biosphere and is likely to bring down the current civilization, along with the animal and plant kingdom as well. This is already going on. I mean, it's obvious to all of us, even though the scientists have been telling us for decades. So what is the solution? You see, the only solution that really works is an increase in sattva. If people were more satisfied, they wouldn't need to go out and loot the planet, you see. And sattva is contagious. One person developing their sattva tends to have an effect of creating a little bit more sattva in the people in their variety, in their environment. But you see, the politicians say, no, this is not good for the economy. So that's our problem. But I would just say everyone is responsible for themselves, and paying attention has profound benefits. In fact, the whole story of spirituality is simply the story of learning to pay attention. If your attention is laser-like, you're going up at high speed. So that is what we really have to cultivate in whatever way, you know, works for us. So let's look at it in terms of the planet. So tamas predominates in the plant kingdom. Rajas, you see, if you were going to be a tree and stand for 1,000 years, you wouldn't be much good if you had a lot of rajas. You can do it if the tamas is enough, but it's a perfectly fine kind of tamas. It's a positive tamas. Then animals can't stand still. They have to keep moving. That's rajas, you see. So the animals, including the humans, have a predominance of rajas. And the divine beings, we say gods, angels, whatever we call them, they have predominance of sattva. You know, having high sattva doesn't mean you're free. It's just you get to live in a, you know, some higher loka. So humans have relatively less tamas and more sattva than the other animals. We can move up or down depending on whether we're cultivating sattva or tamas. Rajas is standard. So the question is, are you cultivating sattva or are you cultivating tamas? Liberation means going beyond sattva. Guna tita, they say. You have to get beyond the sattva. But in order to actually make progress to getting beyond the sattva, it helps to develop the sattva. You know, it's a lot easier when the sattva develops. So this is basically what we said. Sattva is naturally satisfied, and it's perpetually sustainable, because if you're satisfied, basically you're not disturbing your environment. Rajas is not satisfied, so it always needs more and more, which is ultimately unsustainable. This is a situation we face on the planet today, because, you know, the human population could be sustained. The present human population could perfectly well be sustained if the demand from the environment was a bit less. If we all lived happily with less, we could live as 8 billion people, or even 10 billion people. But if we're all demanding more and more, no, it's not. It's clearly unsustainable. And then if we bring in tamas, cruelty, criminality, and corruption, it's totally unsustainable very quickly. See, tamas can't survive without rajas, because rajas create stuff which tamas destroys. So if the tamas gets too high, the whole rajas collapses and it's all gone. That's what's happening today. There is too much tamas. It's not so much the problem is there with the rajas, but the problem really is the tamas. And most of us have no idea of the extent of the tamas, because it's all well hidden, you see. They have police and other security to keep all the prying eyes away from all the bad things that they're doing. So this is it. We don't know when we go to the shops and buy something. We have no idea, you know, what went on in the forests or in the oceans or wherever these things were sourced. So what does Rajas do? Rajas tries to solve the problem by swapping one thing for another. Okay, so, you know, burning coal is bad. Let's have solar power. I mean, it's a good idea, but it's basically swapping one thing for another. And then Tamas says, ha ha, great. So watch what I can do, you see. All right, so this is we'll get more into Jyotish very shortly. But it's important, very important to understand this. So we are told that, you know, renewable is good, you see. So 11% of the US energy production is renewable. But if you actually look at the renewable energy broken down, you find that almost half of it is burning wood and oil. Now, how renewable is that really? Literally, the American forests are being cut down to burn wood to replace burning coal, and they're even being exported. The UK is importing 7 million tons of American forests just for one power plant to replace the coal burning that they were doing before. Is that really renewable? You see, this is very questionable. And then you see, if you look at the electricity production, 5% of it's now wind. Sounds good, doesn't it? Solar is about 2%. But then the cryptocurrency, which is a new thing, we lived without it before, is on the way to being 2%. I mean, Bitcoin's the largest, and it's going towards 1%. But Bitcoin is not contributing really even to the economy, because all of that 1% of the entire electricity production of the world is only supporting about 5 transactions a second. How much of an economy can you run on that? And all those solar panels you put in, well, you know, I'm just making a point here. Tamas, you know, whoever invented cryptocurrency, we don't know, but this is very good for money laundering and evading taxes. All right, so now we have something very sweet, the journey of the soul. So you can think of the whole situation as being rather like a pyramid. At the bottom, there's this kind of eternal darkness, and out of that darkness, then God has sort of created these little seeds that come up. They occur when the ahankara, or the ego sense, is associated somehow with some impulse, and then it starts to rise up slowly. It's a slow process. And as you rise up in the pyramid, then there's more consciousness. So what we get is essentially a wandering soul. So the wandering soul has the different movements. Rajas, which means basically our ordinary, harmless desires, are causing us to move horizontally. If we get into tamas, we are going down. Like we already said, you might end up with an animal birth, maybe you have to stand there for a tree for 1,000 years, who knows? Then, if there's a longing for God, there'll be a tendency to move up. And ultimately reaching that eternal bliss. On the way, as the sattva rises, maybe you get born in some divine loka, it's possible. But here comes the very great promise of Lord Krishna. Because Arjuna said to him, you see, by now we're beginning to think our odds are very poor, like how are we ever going to get back to this planet? It's a hopeless situation. No, it's not at all hopeless. Because this is the question that Arjuna raised to Krishna. It's answered in the Bhagavad Gita. He said, what happens, someone takes to yoga, takes the spiritual path, but can't complete it. They make some progress and then they die. And Lord Krishna says, nothing goes to waste. Any spiritual progress you make will count. And people who are the practitioners of yoga will get a human birth, and they'll get a fortunate human birth. In other words, they'll get born in some good family, maybe some wealthy family. And if they're extremely lucky, they'll be born in the family of yogis. This is what he said. So just, every now and again, I meet some family, and both of the parents, you can see that they're very evolved souls. They're doing their daily meditations. They have spiritual attitude. And they have some kids. The kids are fantastic, usually. I mean, you see the charts. It's like, wow, what a great soul, you see. So this is the promise of Lord Krishna. So there's absolutely nothing depressing about the situation because it's up to us. We should find, all of you, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys are all actively following your spiritual sadhanas. I'm just giving it a little bit of reinforcement, that's all. All right, so now let's look at something about the chart. So the 11th house is the Labhasthana. Labhasthana means gains. So the 11th house is the last part of the Karma Trikona, of the Vayu Trikona, 3rd, 7th, and 11th. It's all about our desires, and therefore the fulfillment of desires is supposed to be in the 11th house. So everybody thinks 11th house, great, let's go and visit the 11th house. And all our friends are over there, and the social media is all over there, the social networks, everything looks good up there, right? Okay, but the natural 11th house is Aquarius. So we have to study Aquarius to find out what really is going on in the 11th house. Because it's, if you're a beginner astrologer, you might get a bit confused because you hear that the 11th house is the place of gains. You think, oh, goody, right? And then you listen to some lecture and they say, oh, it's a Harabhava. I'm going to be punished over there. So you think, what is going on? So let's consider what's going on really. The two rulers of Aquarius are Saturn and Rahu. Saturn is the son of the sun, according to the Puranic stories. So Saturn is, in a sense, the enforcer of the sun. The sun's very simple. It says, go forwards, proceed towards the 12th house. This is the story of the sun. So Shani says, fine, I'm going to keep an eye on all these guys. I have my club. If they're not moving forwards, I'm going to give them a good tap. Right? Then the moon, you see, the moon is the mind and all the enjoyments and everything. He runs the 4th house, yeah? So the moon has his enforcer called Rahu. Rahu is the Mohini, the one who kind of throws that illusion over us that makes us completely lost, as it were, in the fourth house. So, it's a kind of retrograde direction. Rahu is always like retrograde, while Shani is always saying direct, you see. So what we're facing is a kind of crunch between these two guys. Rahu is giving us a kind of bewitchment, he's throwing the illusion. Then he throws in a little bit of some shock from time to time when we find, something went wrong with this thing I'm so attached to. And then there's the element of fear, like, I could lose this thing I'm so attached to. So this is all the energy of Rahu, but mostly he's keeping us hanging on, Well, Shani says, no, this is not good, tap, tap, you see. So it's a very tough spot, really. So we could say Rahu binds us in the 11th and Saturn goads us towards the 12th. Now, if we look at the charts of people who have big influence, the influencers, or people who are, they just get a big crowd of followers, whatever they are, whichever field they're in. We always find a strong Rahu. Rahu creates that kind of bewitchment. It's very effective. Now look at Elvis Presley and all of them. You just don't know why you're following them, really. But just something pulled you in. Now, the 12th house, the Vyaya Bhava. So Vyaya is about passing away, which is indicating the advancement to another place, you see. And so when you leave this place, you have to leave everything behind. So the 12th house is a sort of training zone for letting go. What are we going to sacrifice, you see? So even long before, we're not just here about dying, this is living on this life. We have certain things to do. When you say you have something to do, it means that I've got this service to perform. I will sacrifice my energy, my time, my intelligence, my life even, to perform this sacrifice, perform this service, you see. What makes you think like that is the 12th house. The 12th house is the things that matter to you so much that you're going to do it even at cost to yourself. That is the real Vyaya energy. And that is why the 12th house shows the gati even in this world. Why do you do that particular career? This is where you sacrifice your life force for that, you see. That's why the 12th house shows that. So the whole idea is just expending money. It's fine, okay. It is expending, but, it's not just buying Dior or something. All right, so what do we have to give? So we have Abraham Lincoln. Now, we looked at Abraham Lincoln earlier today, but it was a completely different situation. Now we're looking at the 12th house. So if we look at the 12th house in Lincoln's chart, what we see is the moon. And what does the moon represent? The moon's basically our longevity. Now we can learn a lot more about it. I mean, he sacrificed his life, and many of those who followed him sacrificed their life for the greater good. You see, moon is the lord of the 6th house, so he has to sacrifice. It's a fight. The moon is fighting. That's how the sacrifice comes. If he avoided any fighting, then he wouldn't have been assassinated, would he? And even before he took to politics, he was a lawyer, so he was fighting then for his clients. So it was a noble cause, he fought for it. So moon is in Capricorn. Capricorn is, we call it the graveyard. So he's most famous, I would say, you can correct me, but I would say he's most famous for his speech at Gettysburg, just after the battle, where some 18,000 people had died or were declared missing. So these famous words, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Such beautiful words. So this is Shani. Shani is saying, sacrifice your life for freedom. And when we're, even if we're recruiting for the army and there's some threat from some foreign nation, we say, we're ready to sacrifice our life for freedom. This is the impulse of Shani. And Shani rewards it, There's this traditional concept in the Vedic literature that if you die fighting for a righteous cause, you get immediate promotion to higher worlds. So this is that. Now, Malefics in the 12th house. Moon is a nice benefic. What happens if Shani actually goes over there? Basically, it's an invitation to sin. Shani is not sinful. Shani is not sinful, but it does indicate where we may sin and therefore get beaten. So, of course, the 12th house, we could say it's to do with bed and all that. But look, it's in Virgo. So Shani in Virgo says, hey, you have to respect if this woman is single, she should not be, you don't touch her, right? Purity. The purity, Virgo represents purity, especially of women. We're respecting that, you see. So this is the test. It's a test. Malefics in the 12th house are a test. We should not accept any invitations. But then you see, look at the Lord of Virgo. Virgo has two lords, Mercury, which is in the 6th house, with the Sun and Jupiter, which isn't so bad. But the other one, Rahu, is with Venus in the 5th. So he has a choice in a way. He could follow the path of Mercury, or he could follow the path of Rahu. And Rahu is with Venus. So what happened? We know what happened. 5th house affairs, right? It's very unfortunate. So another gentleman with Saturn in the 12th. This time is not 100% guaranteed to be correct, but I've studied this chart. This really works very correctly. Shani is in Libra. Libra is a sign of relationships. Shani says you have to be very pure in relationships. But unfortunately, the Lord of Libra, Venus, is with Mars in Aquarius. So that is what we call a Gandanta, between the fire and the water, Mars and Venus. So that's a bit dodgy. 4th house, children, whatever. It's a very dodgy situation. So these sort of things, they create durgati. Durgati means the bad path. Durgati, bad path. Don't want to go there. You should be worshipping the goddess, seriously worshipping the goddess and avoiding such things. So it's interesting to note that Harvey Weinstein has Saturn in the 12th house in the Rashi chart, and he went to jail during Saturn Dasha. Jeffrey Epstein, the problem was to do with the Mars Venus, and he went to jail and died during Mars. So, roosters come home. They also had this Bandhana yoga involving the moon and Ketu, both of them. So let's look at some lovely blessings. So this is the chart of Nisargadatta Maharaja. Probably many of you have come across him. He was a very great soul. See, the 12th house is empty. That's actually good. So the rulers of Pisces are Jupiter and Ketu. So Ketu is in a Sattvic sign in the 4th house, and Jupiter is in a Sattvic sign in the 5th house. Jupiter in the 5th shows he can give knowledge to his students, 5th house. And Ketu shows some kind of ability to even give some enlightenment or knowledge of enlightenment, 4th house knowledge, Ketu enlightenment. That's his thing. His thing is giving spiritual knowledge. Lord of the 12 in the 4th house, Ketu. I mean, it's just simple, Very simple. Now people will say, okay, he had a small shop selling cigarettes, so he was a smoker. But, you know, a lot of these great souls, they have some kind of smoke screen they're hiding behind, right? If people have a problem with that, they don't need to come, which is a filtering mechanism. And also sometimes people are so pure that they need a little bit of tamas, otherwise they're just off into some higher loka, you know. If your sattva becomes very high and you still have some work to do, sometimes a little bit of tamas is needed in some way. And then, of course, he died of throat cancer, so eventually it helped him to leave when he wanted to go. Now, this is very interesting. This is what his guru told him. He said, go back to that state of pure being, where the I am is still in its purity, before it got contaminated with this I am or that I am. Your burden is of false self-identifications. Abandon them all. Trust me, I tell you, you are divine. Take it as the absolute truth. Your joy is divine, your suffering is divine too. All comes from God. Remember it always. You are God, your will alone is done. And he just followed this, absolutely without any consideration of questioning or anything. He just did exactly what he was told in these 2 sentences. And in a few years, he had fully achieved, very, very quickly, by typical human standards. And you see, it's this Jupiter Ketu. We've seen the Jupiter Ketu is the rulers of the Pisces, the 12th house. So if you have Pisces in the 12th house, you have this kind of Jupiter Ketu connection. And since it was so powerful and so positive in his chart, then he had this Parampara Yoga. We call it Parampara Yoga. Parampara Yoga means that you can go to a guru and follow the teaching without, you can completely follow the teaching. You're not diverting here or there. You're just following the teaching and you're getting the same level of realization that your guru had. Something like that. So this is the Parampara Yoga showing the faithful student. Swami Achyutananda is the founder of the school of astrology, of which Pandit Sundarat is the last exponent. You know, he's the current exponent, we could say. So it's 500 years ago this school was founded. Of course, Swamiji must have learned from other people. So he again, see, 12th house empty, ruler sun in the 5th, showing giving knowledge and direction to the students. The sun is aspected by Ketu. This is a Rashi Drishti. Ketu has Rashi Drishti, so from Taurus it will have an aspect on Capricorn. So this shows the capacity to enlighten students. Students are in the 5th house. So the sun, truth, is there, aspected by Ketu. So he could enlighten the students. That's how whatever he started has gone on for so long. And then we see that Jupiter is also aspecting the 12th house. It's a fantastic combination of Jupiter and Mercury, and it's Jupiter's aspecting the 12th. Dalai Lama, 12th house empty. Lord Shukra and Moon, also secondary Lord, are both in the 3rd house. So there's that compassion of the 2 benefics in the 3rd house, but it also shows communication and courage. It's a kind of courage which is a non-violent kind of courage. It's in Leo. So he was picked when he was a baby, and he became effectively the king of Tibet. So he was elevated to that, but in the end, he had to let it all go. 12th house. He surrendered it. Even he's given up all his positions in their whatever government in exile. He's purely on the spiritual side these days. Jupiter's in the 5th house of knowledge, aspecting the 12th house by Rashi Drishti. See? Mahatma Gandhi. Here we have a planet in the 12th, Sun. It's Virgo. So if anybody has any complaint about Mahatma Gandhi, it all rotates around something to do with Virgo. But anyway, the Sun is completely unaspected. If you look carefully, no aspects, at least no full aspects, no Rashi aspects. So what did he do? He offered himself. He offered himself, that's the Sun, the soul, basically. And he did it for a political cause, which is also the Sun. The lords are Mercury and Rahu, and they're in the 1st and 10th house. So the whole thing was very high profile. He became famous for it. Mercury's with Mars, so there was an element of fighting. It was a non-violent fighting, but it was very effective, more effective than violent, really. So, this is, you see how it is. It's different from those other charts, which were really much more on the spiritual side, but still, because the Sun is a sattvic planet, he did have a spiritual dimension, and his approach to dealing with problems has a huge influence, beneficial influence on the planet. Many countries have advanced because of his concept of non-violent protesting. Now here's a beautiful chart. This is Padre Pio, the great Catholic saint, and he was famous for the stigmata. Most of his life, his palms and maybe his side were bleeding. So what we see is the Lord, we've got Virgo again, right, in the 12th house, and we see Mercury is with Mars, which is the blood, and it's with Sun, which is the soul, and they're aspected by Rashi Drishti, by Jupiter, and they're in the 8th house of cleansing, you see, the 8th house. So he set an example. It wasn't him that was suffering in the sense that, he had something wrong with him. He didn't. About 3 days before he was going to die, his wounds disappeared completely. They just disappeared as if they'd never been there. And then he left. So there's nothing wrong with him. He was just setting an example in order to help people with this process of transformation, spiritual transformation. It's very interesting, isn't it? So the question that the skeptics will say is the soul different from the body? The assumption of some people is that the soul is only just produced by the electrical activity in the brain, maybe in the heart or something, and if the body drops, there's nothing left. Now, I found just 2-3 weeks ago when I was preparing this lecture, this quote appeared in the British newspaper from a UK health service patient who was having this new special treatment using ketamine. And he had this out-of-body experience. Now, out-of-body experiences are quite common, really. Many people have them, actually. Sometimes in the night, they're moving around. And they're aware of it. It's kind of conscious. You get people who leave their body during an operation. And then sometimes they move outside of the operation room. There's a case where he floated up into the ceiling. That's the standard thing. Looking down, seeing the doctors working and everything going on. And then he just drifted into the waiting room next door, and he saw his relatives, and they were watching a program on the television. So when he recovered later on after the operation, and he told them they were watching this program, they got seriously shocked. So, it's very hard for anyone to argue that the soul is not purely produced by the body, because otherwise, how could you have such experiences? I'm just saying, all these things I've discussed so far are based on very extensive evidence. There's really, the idea of reincarnation is so well supported by so much evidence that it's really, and it's so rational, you see. The idea that some concepts people have which are that it doesn't exist, they just don't really stack up either logically or in terms of the evidence. So let's just think last part, we think about the body. So we've brought the idea that the soul might be different from the body. But the soul is connected to a body, and the body has three elements. There's the stula sharira, which is the gross body. There's the sukshma sharira, which is the subtle body. And then there's the karana sharira, which is the causal body. So the thing that dies when you die is just the gross body. The subtle body persists, and the karana sharira persists. And the sukshma sharira is basically allowing you to function in the stula sharira. The karana sharira is the one that's carrying all the impressions, the ego, and all its baggage. It's got a lot of baggage, which is all those impressions that have been collected over lifetimes. But the karana sharira is very subtle. And when you enter a body and get integrated, it's like the mind, the sukshma associates with the mind, and then there's very little access to the karana sharira level. If you become a developed or advanced yogi, you start to get some access to the karana sharira. That's how you can see into your past lives and many things. So I think a large number of people have a little bit. They have some intimation. Some people have some memories from previous lives. This is not uncommon. But to get the full access requires absolute calmness. You have to reach that state of complete silence, where basically the stula sharira goes into a kind of quiescence, and then the soul is able to extract information from the karana sharira. So what are the causes of rebirth? Desire is Shukra. Shukra is one part of it, the lord of the seventh house, natural lord. And in other words, the Karaka also. So Shukra says, fine. You see, you say, look, I want this, I want that. And Shukra says, good, I'll give it to you. Whatever you ask for, I'll give it to you. But this lifetime, you can't have it. Like you say, I want to be the president of the United States. Oh, no, sorry, you're not born in America. You can't become the president. No, I want to be. Okay, that means you have to be reborn in America. All right, we'll arrange that. Of course, it might happen 500 years later, by which time, there's some other thing going on here and there's no president. So it's like, how many times you have to go round and round to fulfill that promise, you see, that desire. So we should really think about our bucket list, the things we can easily satisfy, go and do it. And the things that you can't, maybe get rid of them somehow, because there's no guarantee in the future that some chance for that will occur. And if it does, do you really want to come back and go through the whole process just for that, you see? Because by the time you get it, you've forgotten that you really wanted it, and you find that it comes with a lot of problems which you really don't want, right? It's so we should be cautious with our, Shukra is good, but we should be aware of the consequences. And then there's Rahu, which is the addiction to the material. And Rahu is very clever. He says, okay, he raises questions. Like he is a lecture like this one, and he starts saying, yeah, but what about this? And oh no, I don't believe in that. And all kinds of questions. Rahu is just, one big head, and that head's full of intelligence, and he asks one question after another, and is totally skeptical, right? It's Rahu. You see, but by doing that, he diverts everyone from the spiritual path and keeps you fully in bondage. So that's the skill of Rahu. And because of that, you're going round and round. So these two guys, you have to get some kind of, positive relationship with. That's why worshipping the Divine Mother is so great, because she's the only one that can manage Shukra and Rahu, really speaking. She is the one that has the management control over there. So if we ask her nicely, you see, the trouble is people start worshipping her and then she starts getting friendly, and then you say, hey, give me this, give me that. Okay, one more round. You see, so we should really, really, be aware. There's only one thing to ask for. We want to be out. We want freedom. That's it, No. So I'd like to end on that note. And thank you very much for listening.
If there are any questions for Andrew, I think there's just somebody saying, oh, there's new question now. Andrew, please check.
Yes. Do you have a benefic in the 12th house? Does this mean that something has to be sacrificed, as indicated by the karaka of the planet and or the house lordship? You see, just if you use the word sacrifice, it sounds unattractive, doesn't it? But if you say it's my life path, then it sounds better, right? So it's just a question of your attitude towards it, because you should look at whatever that is in the 12th house, you have to give it. You have to give it. There's no choice. Otherwise, you get to the end and they say, hey, you completely failed your mission. We sent you down there to make a donation of this kind. And what did you do? And then you feel ashamed. You say, okay, I'll try better next time.
Andrew, I have a question.
It's a blessing. It's a very great blessing, but we should activate the blessing by actively giving in the area that planet is indicating. You see, don't be put off. Bardikesh in the 12th is the biggest blessing, according to Sanjay, right? Because basically the Bardikesh is the kind of Rahu, and you give it away, and then you don't have it anymore. It's a kind of, it saves you from the Bardikesh.
Andrew, I have a question. What about 12th house from the moon? Would you look at that as well, or just from the Lagna?
Yes, very good question. So you see, each thing you have to see. The Lagna is a kind of like the body, or the ego, we could say. And then the moon is the social self. So the 12th from the moon is what we have to give to our society, basically. From the 12th house, it may be more personal. That's the difference, basically. You have to give what's in the 12th from the moon, but that has to go to, many people. It's some kind of more of a social thing. Oh, yeah. So this question about, the point was that Mula Nakshatra has 4 Navamshas, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer. But if you study the Parashara, you see that the Mula Trikona of Guru, the Guru's responsibility is only for the first 3 Navamshas. So you say, why is that? It's because the people in the 4th Navamsha are fine. They don't need the Guru to sort out where they're going. They're automatically going up. So that those whose there's a more questionable situation. So then they're slotted into those other 3 Navamshas. I mean, I'm just suggesting this explanation because that is where the work of the Guru is, you see. I don't know if any of you has come across the writings of Sri M, but he's written a very interesting autobiography which gives some examples of this, how the Gurus, like Ramakrishna Paramahansa and Sri Guru Babaji and those, they're there when the person dies. If a person has to be looked after, they actually show up themselves and send them off to the next place, you see. Most people, they send someone else, your deceased aunt or somebody is sitting waiting for you, but they've been that's their job. They've been sent to take care of that. Okay. Would the Venus in the 12th be seen as benefic for the spiritual path? Venus in the 12th is very good. Because Venus in the 12th is like Venus exalted. When Venus gets exalted, it becomes bhakti. So that's what we have to give, is bhakti. I mean, real love, like not the ordinary, low level, whatever. It's selfish love. It's completely unselfish, unconditional love, which is a rare thing in this planet. But at least there's some chance with Venus in the 12th. Doesn't guarantee, but there's some chance. And there's lots of other reasons why Venus in the 12th there's very profound reasons why Venus in the 12th is good. but it means you have to sacrifice something. You know, some of the things that Venus represents, you have to let go of. That is going to be the reality. And then, how about spiritual people? 12 from Karaka is a whole nother lecture, basically. But the principle is similar. Would an empty 12th house and the Lord gone to the 11th house indicate a heightening of the Rahu Shani conflict? It could be. It could be, you see. Somehow that's what you have to sort out. The Lord has gone to the 11th house, and now you're faced with this conflicting situation. So, you know, you'll spend your lifetime sorting that one out. It's perfectly okay. Wherever the 12th Lord has gone is all perfectly fine. It's just whatever you're here to see. See, we come here to witness certain things, or we could say experience certain things. The reason why astrology works is because the whole thing is pretty much pre-programmed. You know, it's all giant intelligent machine, and whatever we think we have some control over, we're in reality is very little. But we should use whatever little we've got to move upwards. That's the point, Lord Krishna's point. Don't take a fatalistic approach. Take a proactive approach. Practice yoga, go up. That's Lord Krishna's message. Fourth Navamsha, fourth pada, exactly the same. Each nakshatra has 4 padas, and they are coincident with 4 Navamshas. The 12th always combined. I mean, we have to see the chart. You have to always see a complete chart. But the combustion of the 12th Lord is perfectly fine. You just have to see what is going on with that. What is really happening in that combustion? You know, maybe, just maybe, without seeing the chart, you have to, there's some kind of softness that has to develop. You see, the problem with combustion is you're all burnt up. So there's a lot of frustration that can develop because you want something and you're not getting it because of this sun. The sun is basically dominating the situation, giving me nothing that I want. Okay, maybe you have to develop your relationship with the sun. Maybe you should understand that sun as being the Surya Narayana, the great soul of all, you see. Now, what you do with the great soul, you only have to put your head on the floor and treat it with the utmost respect. So you have to think in your own context what it is. There is some kind of surrendering of the ego that may be needed. There could be many implications. It all depends on the chart. Okay. You see, whatever the story is in the 12th house, you just have to kind of deconstruct it based on the planets and the lordships and the aspects. You have to put all the pieces together and make your story out of it. You see, and if it's in your chart, you do know what it is. It's just that human beings have this natural tendency to bury their heads in the sand, you see. I often think that there's no greater, the greatest speciality of the Homo sapiens is denial. We are so expert at it. Everyone's in some kind of denial, you see. Like, I'm not going to die. You can't say that because you know you are going to die, but you don't, you sort of push it into some corner and pretend it's not there, right? So the first step of getting out of denial, which is very necessary, is to say, okay, I'm dying sometime. It could be the next second, it could be tomorrow, it could be in 10 years or 100 years, but it's surely going to happen. So what am I going to do about it? Am I going to be ready? You see, in the old days when in the West, everyone was part of the church and most everybody, and you were told regularly that you were a sinner and you were going to die. Well, it's wrong to tell people they're just a sinner, I think. But anyway, if you take a positive attitude and say, okay, so I'm going to stop sinning, I'm going to, try to be what I think God wants of me. But the thing about the 12th house is it actually shows us what God wants of us. You see, it's not a question moralistic. Some people will stand on their soapbox and say, everyone should be vegetarian, everybody should this. That's just soapbox. Each person has their own path to play, path to follow, and it's going to be different, you see. You can't come up with some kind of, rule that fits everybody. It doesn't ever work like that. But the thing is, what everybody has to try to develop is a certain kind of soft humbleness. Because the great thing about the wise people is they're all very humble. Real humility. It's not the humility where, I was beaten, so I'm now cowering in a corner. That's not humility, because your heart is full of rage and resentment. That's not humility at all. But there's a kind of gentleness which is happy with the world. It doesn't hold anything against anybody. And that is so beautiful that God comes down himself and takes you, if you're so lucky to have that kind of consciousness. Yeah, thank you, Karen.
Andrew, one more question, then we have to close.
Oh, let me see. I haven't seen all the questions. Yeah, if you have Moon Rahu in the Taurus, there's a lot of good in that. It's Rahu is the natural, one of the challenges. So, it's a very deep thing. We'd have to have a private discussion about it. The 12th Lord is in the 8th house is supposed to be good according to Parashara. You see, I showed you an example of the 12th Lord in the 8th house, Padre Pio. Now, most of us, when we look at his life, we think, I'm not that caliber type of a person. Not sure I could lie on my bed bleeding for decades. But the reality is that we wish we had that kind of quality of personality. I mean, he was such a blessed soul. He caused so much healing around him. I mean, it is a highly exalted state, but what he was giving all the time was he was helping people with their 8th house. He was elevating them again and again. So that's something which, is a very challenging but extremely blessed situation. So we're not all Padre Pio, but, it's good to study people like that who have something in common with our chart and try to, study as much as we can so we start to feel something of what their life meant. Yeah.
Great. So, Andrew, thank you very much. It was a superb lecture. I was thinking that, even though we may not be like that, we can aspire towards the higher self.
That was entirely my point.
Yeah. So that we are maybe not perfect, but at least trying to take our steps to that side. That's I love your lecture. Thank you so much. So I have tomorrow's program here now. So we are going to start with Professor Jayashekhar, and he is our senior, great Guruji astrologer. He's going to talk about Vedic Ashrama Dharma. So he's actually